This series is an in-depth exploration into Japanese Buddhism that doesn't require any prior knowledge. Previously, we covered why I'm studying the Chūrong and briefly touched on its philosophy of emptiness. This episode focuses on Nagarjuna, the philosopher who composed the Chūrong. I originally planned to cover more ground in this episode, but Nagarjuna deserves an episode dedicated to him. We will look at his life, both the historical facts and the legends, and understand his philosophical project, why he wrote the Chūrong, who he was arguing against, and what made his methods so revolutionary. There's a personal element in every philosophy. One could debate exactly how separate a philosopher is from his work. Well, not Nagarjuna, because he wouldn't consider either the philosophy or the work to be inherently existing. But let's not veer off topic by getting into the logic now. Even if a philosopher is expounding universal truth, why and how he does so depends on his particular circumstances. And so I consider learning about the philosopher a part of learning about the philosophy. I was also curious as to the person who not only prefigured my own philosophical thought centuries before I organically came to it, but also instigated a major religious movement that shaped Eastern thought and, as an extension, world thought as a whole. In major Japanese Buddhist sects in Japan, he is revered as the八宗の祖師because he laid the foundations of Madhyamaka Buddhism, upon which the major Japanese traditions, Tendai, Shingon, Hoso, Sanron, Kegon, Nisshu, Jodo, and Zen are built on. So learning about him is also a part of learning about Japanese Buddhist traditions. He's also South Indian, like me, but that's a minor point. Once again, his Japanese name is Ryūju, and his original Sanskrit name is Nagarjuna. I'll use the two interchangeably, but for the most part, I'll be referring to him by his Sanskrit name. Indeed, why does a South Indian monk, living somewhere between the 2nd to 3rd century CE, have a Japanese name that doesn't sound anything like his original name? This is because Buddhism was transmitted to Japan via China. Chinese translators translated the names of significant figures. In doing so, they gave them Chinese characters. Japanese uses most of the same characters, especially back then. Do the kanji names have anything to do with their original names? Of course. The Chinese translators weren't just randomly assigning Chinese characters to the names of these Buddhist figures. Let's take Chandrakirti for example. In Sanskrit, Chandra means moon, and Chandrakirti means glory of the moon. The Chinese character for moon is this, and so they use the character in his name. Yuecheng. 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 I'm sure I butchered the Chinese pronunciation, but I've never learned Chinese, so hopefully I butcher the Japanese version less. Gesho. Now, Gesho doesn't sound anything like Chandrakirti, but for other names, there is somewhat of a phonetic match. Take Bodhidharma for example. His Japanese name is Bodhidharma, so sounds pretty similar. The Ryu in Ryūju is dragon, and the Ju is ki. Oh my god. The Ju is tree, which could also be read as ki, but in this case it's read as Ju. The reason for Ju being a part of his name is because, according to the legend, he was born under an Arjuna tree. As for Ryu, the dragon kanji is referring to the Nāgas. Nāgas are semi-divine reptilian creatures that are referenced in Hindu and Buddhist scriptures. In some parts of India, Nāgas are still worshipped today. In the Buddhist tradition, it is said that Buddha converted the Nagas by teaching them about Dharma. As for why Nagarjuna is named after them, that'll be covered in the next section. There is so much that we don't know about Nagarjuna, and many historical texts on Nagarjuna mix myth with historical accounts. Some historians theorize that there are many Nagarjunas, whereas Butong Rinchen Drup's text on the history of Buddhism claims that Nagarjuna lived for 600 years serving the Dharma. I have no issue with the mythology-history hybrid, because it is what shaped the actual traditions that stem from Nagarjuna. In other words, even if the stories are not factually true, they are real in the sense that they shape the minds of the people who in turn shape the world. And besides, one can understand without believing or disbelieving in something. And so let's acquaint ourselves with the Nagarjuna that is known all over the world by those who have preserved his teachings. Specifically, the Nagarjuna from the legend translated by Kumarajiva, of which the original Sanskrit is lost. Nagarjuna was born into a Brahmin family in South India sometime around the 1st or 2nd century CE. He was extremely intelligent and could understand anything after only being taught it once. He learned the 4 Vedas and understood their meaning upon first hearing their recitations. When he was an adolescent, he set about traveling the land with his 3 companions. Together, they sought to learn arcane knowledge and supernatural abilities. They didn't do this for some noble purpose. They were just teenagers who sought amusement in intellectual activity. To put it crudely, they were knowledge junkies, always looking for their next fix after mastering an art. Why was learning their entertainment? Because they were Brahmins, and enjoyment through the sensual was forbidden for their caste by society. However, they found a way around this. They sought out someone to teach them the art of invisibility. And after learning that, they did exactly what you think invisible teenagers would do. In a palace, no less. And so, after one of the king's daughters was found to be pregnant, the king and the advisors figured out there were invisible infiltrators in the palace. They shut out all routes of escape, and the king ordered his soldiers to swing their swords about to kill the invisible infiltrators. All of Nagarjuna's 3 friends were killed. Only Nagarjuna survived because he stood next to the king. There was a rule that forbid soldiers from being 7 feet within the radius of the king, so Nagarjuna was safe. After this experience, Nagarjuna repented his ways, seeing that attachment to pleasure leads one down a dangerous path, and so he decided to be a monastic. What I like about this legend, as opposed to the other 2 presented by Nakamura Hajime in this book, is that this Nagarjuna was not a person of good character to begin with. Sure, he was intelligent, but he used that intelligence just for his own self-satisfaction. After realizing the errors of his ways at the palace, he decided to take an oath of monasticism. So he went to a nearby stupa and studied the Buddhist scriptures for 90 days. After that, he wanted more scriptures, but couldn't find any. So he traveled all around the land. When he went to the Himalayas, he encountered an old bhikkhu, a practitioner, who introduced him to the Mahayana texts. After Nagarjuna established himself as a teacher for the benefit of others, the king of the Nagas took him to his underwater palace, where Buddha's lost teachings were held, specifically the Prajñāpāramitā sutras. In Japanese, the Hanyakyo. Included within them are the Diamond Sutra, Kongokyo, and the Heart Sutra, Hanyashingyo. The last one, if you remember, is what acquainted me with Japanese Buddhism in the first place. The Hanyakyo are among the most central foundations of Mahayana Buddhism, Daijo Bukkyo, and Nagarjuna's Churong is often seen as giving a systematic philosophical expression to their teachings on emptiness. The Hanyakyo and Churong combo influenced the Sannon tradition in China and the Tendai and Zen traditions in Japan. I should also mention here that the Lotus Sutra, Hokkekyo, is also a major Mahayana text, but is not a part of the Hanya-kyo. After returning from the kingdom of the Nagas, Nagarjuna worked to spread the knowledge contained in the texts. The legend of Nagarjuna going down to the realm of the Nagas to obtain the Hanya-kyo is what allows Mahayana Buddhism to claim itself as being descended from the Buddha. Legend aside, the sutras seem to have been composed over several centuries, beginning in the 1st century BCE and CE. Nagarjuna's primary importance in the Mahayana tradition is in logically formalizing the teachings of emptiness found within the texts. The philosophical exposition was necessary because the sutras are difficult to understand. The sutras express with words what cannot be expressed in words. Without a proper intellectual foundation in emptiness, it is unlikely that anyone would benefit from the sutras themselves. He had to prove that the teaching of emptiness was the Buddha's true teachings, because the Buddha himself did not systemize his teachings. The Buddha gave different teachings to different people depending on their need. This is why there are different schools of Buddhism. They all systematize the Buddha's teachings in their own way. The most prominent schools of Buddhism in Nagarjuna's time were direct lineages of the Buddha himself, and they rejected the Mahayana texts as not being the true teachings. Nagarjuna's primary opponent was the Abhidharma traditions that had developed sophisticated systems analyzing all phenomena into fundamental constituents, dharmas, which they held to be ultimately real. This concept of ultimately real elements with svabhava, inherent existence, is precisely what Nagarjuna targets in the Chūrōng. We'll explore their position in detail in the next episode, but for now, understand that Nagarjuna was arguing against a rigorous philosophical system, not mere conventional thinking. Nagarjuna's position, and the Mahayana position in general, is that the Mahayana teachings are the ultimate teachings of the Buddha, and that other schools merely teach conventional truths. So he isn't simply saying that his opponents are wrong, but that their teachings are only relatively correct compared to the normal view of the world. Such relative truths won't lead to ultimate realization of emptiness, and so will not lead to liberation. Instead of asserting a position against his opponents and trying to prove it right, Nagarjuna merely shows that his opponent's positions don't hold. His methods of argumentation, prasaṅgika, or reductio ad absurdum, shows the absurdities that arise when we consider a position to be true. Nagarjuna doesn't see the need to uphold emptiness itself as a position, because it is the apparent truth that remains when all conventional truths are negated. The Chūrōng, which is the focus of the series right now, is a work of rigorous logic. But that is not all that Nagarjuna wrote. He also wrote extensively on the Bodhisattva ideal, the Mahayana principle of seeking enlightenment for the benefit of all beings rather than just oneself. We'll explore this more in depth in a future episode. But for now, it's enough to know that Nagarjuna provided both the logical foundation of emptiness and the ethical foundation of compassion that define Mahayana Buddhism. So there you have it, Nagarjuna, flawed teenager turned philosopher who laid the logical and ethical foundations of Mahayana Buddhism. What strikes me about this story is that he was not born a sage. He had to learn through suffering and mistakes, which makes his philosophy feel more human and more earned. Understanding Nagarjuna the person helps us understand the Chūrōng as more than abstract logic. It's a defense of a contested tradition, a systematic refutation of sophisticated opponents, and a method for dissolving fixed views rather than establishing new ones. This aligns with what I discussed in the first episode, the need for an active process of dissolving worldviews rather than creating another worldview. In the next episode, we'll examine the philosophical landscape Nagarjuna was engaging with. We'll look at the Abhidharma tradition in detail, what they believed, why they believed it, and why Nagarjuna found their position to be problematic. We'll also explore the historical development of Mahayana Buddhism and how it positioned itself within the broader Buddhist tradition. For every episode, check out the description for links relevant to what we discussed in the video. If you have anything to ask or share, please do so in the comments. And for more videos exploring aspects of the written culture of Japan, subscribe to the channel.